You're listening to Chem Stories, a podcast series created by people with lived experience of P&P chemsex.
Greetings, icons. This is Captain Patrice welcoming you aboard Chem Stories Airlines for our YHZ maturity flight. On this third and last Halifax departure, host Andrew introduces two experienced flyers, Harry and Hector. Our flight plan forecasts a two-part conversation exploring P&P and aging, desire and connection between generations, and the complex interplay of power and intimacy in the context of chemsex. We'll be on their way shortly, so please make sure to keep your hearts and minds open at all times. Keep your prejudices securely stowed, as this flight is a judgment-free zone, and prepare for takeoff. Should you experience turbulence while listening to this podcast, please visit our list of resources and services related to P&P chemsex in the episode description and on chemstories.ca. Thank you for choosing Chem Stories Airlines, where the journey is always a trip.
Welcome to Chem Stories, the podcast exploring the diverse lived experiences of people who engage in chemsex, made by the community for the community. I'm your host, Andrew Thomas, founder of the P&P Project. In this episode, we're diving into the deep end. P&P and aging, the role of HIV, desire, and connection between generations, and the complex interplay of power and intimacy in our encounters. Let's start the conversation. So once again, we're in Halifax, and we have Hector and Harry joining us. Hector, can you tell me a little bit about your journey?
But I guess for me, used to sort of started in my mid-50s, right? Nearing very closely to 60 now, and started when I retired, right? And ended a relationship. So suddenly here's all this time that I had on my hand. Like, I retired prior to when I expected to retire, just because COVID, health, and many factors. And suddenly here you are, like, I'm alone now. Nobody, my partner's gone and met the wrong people or the right people. But, I guess I would say about 3 years ago, I was introduced to tea and had no idea what I was doing and had amazing sex. And from there, it was occasionally to very frequent. Within a year, it gradually increased to, I don't know how, but I'm not going to say it's daily, but to very regular usage. It's not what I expected. I won't say that it's an addiction but it is. You can still manage, you can still work, you can still do, you live a productive life. People don't know that you're high. And my background from where I worked in the helping profession, right, being in counseling people that had addictions and whatnot. I mean, I knew everything. I knew everything about the programs, the high-risk situations, what you should do, shouldn't do. And here I am. You kind of go like, whoa, how does that happen to someone that's educated that should have known better? And then you start using, doesn't matter if you're educated or not. But yeah, so here I am today, living the life I never thought I would, using a substance I said I'd never use, and dealing with it day by day, and still debating, when am I going to stop, right? Am I ever going to be able to stop? I don't know, but it's been a struggle, and it's been a fun ride.
Thank you for sharing that. And Harry, can we get a little bit about your journey into chemsex?
Yeah, I've had involvement also with Tina. I would characterize myself sort of in active use currently, but managed. But in terms of, my path and my experience, I started using for the first time in my early 40s, living in a major center. Now I'm in my 60s, so I've got a 20-year history or experience of use. Although within that history, I've had significant periods of sobriety, and now I am retired, which, in some ways has posed additional challenges in terms of managing my use because of availability of time and whatnot, and not having the rigors of a high pressure job. So yeah, it's sort of interesting as one looks back with respect to patterns of use and, a 20-year trajectory of use, what's changed and what's stayed the same. And yeah, I remember quite distinctly, my first use, and I knew I shouldn't. And in many ways, I knew, what I was getting into or not. But you still, for whatever reason, made that initial decision. And Tina itself, or crystal meth, is, it's a powerful, powerful drug. Like, it's unlike any, I've done many of the letters of the alphabet, if you will, and it's been much easier to limit the use of those or eliminate the use of those, until I came upon Tina. And and here we are. I've worked hard at sort of boundaring things in terms of both harm reduction and periods of abstinence. And, now in retirement, in many ways, some of those sort of barriers to more frequent use have been eliminated, but they've kind of been replaced with other things too. And maybe there's something about the allure of sort of more frequent or constant use. The luster has come off a bit.
Thank you, both of you, for sharing that. Now, I have the perception that chemsex is a little bit different here in Halifax than it is in the big cities. I wanted to ask each of you what you thought about the chemsex scene here in Halifax.
I'm just going to say that I can't really relate because I've never been to the big cities, right? I'm a maritimer and lived in the cities in New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, so there's not much comparison. I've heard stories, but it doesn't compare. The stories that I've heard from the people that come from Ontario or whatever, Montreal, are not at all like here. Like, this is pretty small, whatever. Maybe somebody else has more to share.
Yeah, is there the 2 or 3 bigger cities there in New Brunswick? Is there a comparison to be made?
I'd say they're all the same.
Yeah?
Yeah. I mean, prices vary, right? Significantly. But apart from that, it's pretty much the same scene, right? Cities are pretty much the same thing. I mean, Halifax has a higher population, but it's not necessarily more active than, say, Moncton, Fredericton, or, yeah. I find they're pretty much equal.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I've got some perspective on larger cities, having lived in one of the major metropolitan Canadian cities for over 20 years and having returned to Halifax a few years ago. No question, it's a quieter scene, but in my experience over the last few years, particularly use of Tina seems to be on the increase. And it's for me, I've managed to sort of assemble a bit of a collection of regular guys that I hang out with, which has some benefit in terms of knowing, what the experience is going to be like and whatnot. So it's definitely not quite as anonymous as it might be in a bigger city. And for me, there was a period of adapting, and for me, it was actually good to have a bit of a quieter scene, because I think that if I might have had as much time on my hands in a bigger city in retirement, it might have had a different outcome.
I totally agree with you.
Yeah.
Like, I wouldn't go to the big city just because of the fear of what I could get involved in. Because, like here, people gossip. Everybody's business here. Like, nothing's a secret. You meet people and they tell you, like, oh, do you know this guy? Do you know this guy? And I'm going like, what the fuck?
Yeah, all the time. That's a major concern, I think, for a lot of people, right?
Yeah, because you don't know the role that a person has. You don't know what their job is, or you may, but anyway, it's not for me to say that, Tom is using tea, right? Or whoever, whatever name. But people do that. They just voluntarily say, like, these are the users in the city. And it's kind of like, oh, keep it to yourself, or they don't.
Do you think it's worse, the gossip in Halifax?
I think it's, you're dealing with a much smaller pool. So there's just more anonymity in a larger center. And, to your point of, people talking about other users, if you will, other participants in that area, I would say it's less gossipy in a bigger city. It's just more anonymous. And, even for me, because I'm a bit of not a public figure, but I've got involvements outside the using community, and I've got to be a bit careful about protecting that, because I'm from Halifax originally, even though I was away for many years, and sort of I'm a bit of a known quantity. So that's a bit of a balancing act. And maybe at times I don't do the best job of protecting that privacy and whatnot.
Has it ever threatened your personal life, I guess, and the gossip or things people are saying about you? Has anyone ever threatened to expose you or?
It came to a point, I was threatened that people were going to disclose things to my family. And it was, they can't find out, no way. Anyway, at the end of the day, they all know now. But it's not I'm not proud of it, right? And you get this label, but I'd rather them hear it from me than to hear it from someone else from off the street. But, you kind of go, are they pointing the finger and say, oh, he's one of them?
Yeah, I've been lucky insofar as I sort of haven't been threatened with sort of, having my life disclosed. But I am at times concerned that in the online world where people do gossip, that friends do know about my life. And my best friends do know about my use, particularly during periods of recovery when I've actually sought sort of professional help and recovery. I needed their support at that time. So, you can't go to an inpatient program for 7 weeks and disappear without explaining your absence. So, to those closest around you, I've had to also make that decision to disclose, which has been empowering in many ways.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the same thing, kind of beating people to it, telling what you care about first, and then, people can't hurt you with it after that.
Yeah, managing the message. And,
In relation to substances, how is availability of different substances here, P&P drugs, compared to other places that you've partied?
They're accessible. You find them. If you want them, you're going to find them. Maybe a little bit more challenging. But again, I'm just talking about the Maritimes. But, you find them. It depends how much you want to pay for it. And what's the quality you want. It differs so much.
Yeah, I would agree that everything is accessible at a price or, with enough perseverance. There's no question that there seems to be in the quote unquote party scene, at least in Halifax, coke and crack have historically been much more prevalent. But in my experience, since returning to Halifax, the propensity of crystal meth and Tina has on the rise.
Yeah, I would say definitely Tina and crack. The most people that I meet will be either or. People that use tea are we're all okay with it, but people that do the crack don't like the people that do the tea. And it's kind of what's the difference? A drug is a drug. And depending how you use it, they're very judgmental. And
it's sort of ironic.
Which it is. It's
so you can bang this, but I can't snort this. Whatever. But,
Stigma within substances, in fact.
Yeah, and the prevalence of GHB not quite as heavily used in my experience here or even known about.
It's very challenging to try to find.
And expensive when you can find it.
Were both of you using in the 70s, 80s?
No, not these substances. No, my sort of, if you call it illicit drug use, would have begun in the late 90s. I had sort of a circuit party period of my life that sort of lasted 5 years, and that was sort of ecstasy and Molly and ketamine and whatnot. And then I sort of stepped away from those substances quite significantly because I was just involved in a very demanding career and I couldn't balance both. So lucky for me, I made the choice to abandon the substances. It's interesting, even coke as a substance. I did it years ago and I liked it, but I recognized how much I liked it and I was sort of able to put the brakes on it. And that's sort of talking about the early 2000s. Yeah. So if that gets to the question.
Yeah, I was wondering how the drug landscape has changed, and you did answer that. And you mentioned earlier, I think, the rise of meth over traditionally what we see here, crack cocaine, and cocaine just in general, is a big drug, right? But that shift towards meth, yeah, same thing with you.
I didn't have much usage prior to this, a little bit of coke here and there, but it wasn't my thing. Yeah, and I knew I get highly addicted. So it was just kind of like sporadic. I would have never bought it. It was just, at a party somewhere, tried it here and there. Same thing as ecstasy. It was like, okay, cool once in a while, but never like usage like tea.
And if I sort of think back, in terms of my experience in a bigger major metropolitan city in the early 2000s when I was sort of having my circuit party days, I mean, there were people on the periphery who were using Tina, but it wasn't widespread. But I would argue that sort of over the 20 years that followed in Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, just an absolute explosion of the use of Tina. And, if somebody referred to themselves as a partier, with 90% certainty, it would be Tina. And, I remember even living in one of those bigger cities and just the ease of finding hookups and drug use was remarkably easy.
Do you have any speculations on why?
That's a big question. I mean, why has it, I guess if I sort of narrow that question down, why particularly the gay community? I think, in my observation, the gay community was so potentially vulnerable and ripe to a substance that lowered all inhibitions. There's no question, in at least my experience, that, the heightened sexualness of Tina versus even some other drugs played very well into the gay community's existence. And even all of the challenges that many in the gay community have had in terms of their own self-esteem and whatever their journey has been with respect to their sexuality and other aspects, Tina, particularly as a drug, was just ripe for explosion.
It definitely boosts your self-esteem, right? In your experience, everything is like, it's such a good feeling. Well, at the beginning.
Yeah, community that's somewhat broken, maybe sexually, a lot of internalized homophobia and stuff, right? Do you think the dating apps had anything to do with the explosion of?
For sure. Yeah, no question. I think, I mean, if I sort of think back in the old days of how you used to meet people before Grindr and everything else, dating app, quote unquote dating apps. I mean, you just have to go to a bar and buy somebody a drink and actually know what they look like and all of those kinds of things. It was, it was not quite so instantaneous and, yeah.
Sexual invisibility on the apps. Yeah. Oftentimes older queer men might feel invisible on the apps because maybe their body isn't as muscular or skin isn't as taut.
But is it less seen or is it because you've been there such a long time that you become kind of a fixture of the app versus, if you're a new person, totally different, right? But once you've been there for a while, you become kind of invisible because, well, I know who he is or whatever, right? He's not my cup of tea or whatever. And of course, he's older, right? Or he's not that perfect body. Definitely don't fall in the perfect body type, right?
That's a good point, because I just re-downloaded Grindr and it's popping off right now. Just it won't last. It'll slow down, but
because they don't know who you are.
You're fresh meat, yeah.
And also, I don't think I've ever been asked. Maybe it's an Eastern Zone thing. I've never been asked my age so many times, and it matters to people if you're 39 rather than 38. Like that 1 year matters.
They have that cutoff point that if you're older, then we're going to say, like you say, 46. Well, what's the difference between 46 and 49 or 52? Doesn't it, what you look like, right? I mean, isn't that more important than a number? But they put a lot of emphasis on the number. So, of course, and everybody lies about their age. Who wants to give their true age?
I do.
Do you?
Yeah. I mean,
I went 2 years off.
Yeah. I've always put my age on profiles, and, my pictures are accurate and recent. And I just sort of figure, I don't want to be accused of catfishing, and there's my age. And if that works for you, occasionally I get a message to say, oh, you look really good for your age. How do I feel about that comment? Like, I don't sort of take too much judgment for that. But I still would say it sort of goes back to that whole business of power dynamics and interest on younger people for the older. I marvel myself at, sometimes even when I'm with somebody, 35, even when I'm high, I'm like,
What do you see in me? I mean,
when it doesn't seem to be that they're just there for the drugs or the hookup or the whatever. Anyway, maybe that's me just trying to be too honest and trying to understand what's going on in their head.
Do you think that chemsex creates a bridge between younger generations and your generation? Are there any differences or power imbalances that you see? Maybe sugar daddy status or sugar baby? Does that come into play at all?
I mean, there's definitely something there. And I still today scratch my head at the interest that I get from younger guys. And I often sort of put myself in their shoe, or, what was I like when I was 30? Like, when I was 30, I wasn't necessarily doing these kinds of drugs, but I didn't have any interest in somebody who's now my age. And that seems to have all gone out the window, even outside of the partying scene, it would seem to me. In terms of power imbalance, like personally, I'm quite careful about managing that, recognizing my relative power, influence, age, wealth, privilege, all of that. I mean, I suppose to somebody younger, that can all be very appealing, but I also am quite careful at not exploiting that. I've seen lots of situations where the person in power does exploit that power dynamic, and that's not the person I want to be. But that said, do I hate it when somebody young and attractive is appealing or is attracted to me? I don't hate it.
I mean, sometimes I just kind of shake my head and go, why does this, you say, 30-some-year-old that's bust up and want to have sex with me? I'm like, what do I have to offer? I'm like shaking my head. I know I have lots to offer. At the end, it's kind of like a wonderful, amazing experience, but that's all it is. Like, for me, it's only sex, nothing more than sex. Some of them want more. And from the get-go, it's like, I want nothing more than, this is Quay. You're not going to get attached. You're not going to get this. I'm not going to pay for this. I'm not going to, because they tend to, or even the younger than 30s, they want you to pay for their taxi. They want you to have the poppers, have the drugs, have, everything. Like, you have to have everything. You have to host. You have to.
It becomes rather transactional.
That's it. And at the end, it's like, I don't mind, like, once in a while, but it's not going to become a daily habit because I'm not going to fork out that money, right? But then they become, like, attached, or they expect that they can, like, call you anytime. Like, I get, some people, I start getting text messages, like, and I'm like, no, or phone calls. No, you don't call me. If I gave you my number, you can send it to me a text because it's like Friday night and, hey, what are you doing? But you don't call me on a Saturday at 6 o'clock. Hey, what are you doing tonight? I'm here with my buddy, having supper. No. So, like, the boundaries are hard to set for some, but it's, yeah.
It is hard to set, and people showing up at your place, knocking on the window.
I'm lucky that hasn't happened too often, but it's happened once in a while. But, the last thing you want is somebody show up at your place unannounced. No, this is not part of the game. And they don't seem to understand, and they get upset, right? Then they start having issues and freak out, and whoa, I don't want to be a therapist.
Yeah, it's when it becomes expected, I think, that bothers me the most. The cab, the stuff.
Or when you tell them it's time to go home, like, okay, it's done. It's 4 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning. I have to, excuse, work, or I have an appointment. and they just don't want to leave. I was like, what do you not understand? Like, so that becomes tiresome, but we don't stop, right?
Yeah, I think it's for me, it's been all about sort of establishing boundaries, establishing expectations. It probably speaks to why, I tend to prefer to have repeats with people that I know and know what kind of character they are and know what they're expecting. And, when somebody's sort of a blatant freeloader, that gets tired very quickly, or it can do, despite how hot you may or may not be.
And what local services are currently available? There's not a lot here in Halifax. So maybe what services do you wish existed here, or supports, I guess?
We don't have to be open to go to the services, even if they're there. If you're not willing to go, and for me, it's to walk in that building and say, I have a problem, right? Be mental health, like, to go and see the psychologist, to go and to get the help you want. So, it has to, when it should be advertised, it's not like publicly advertised.
And I think the reality is that there's little to advertise.
Right.
And I think the challenge becomes what you want is services and support to be available when one is ready. And that's what they're looking for. And for example, I have a wonderful doctor that I see who's an addictions specialist. I sort of credit her quite a bit in terms of keeping me within boundaries of my use. And the only reason I sort of found out about her is my family doctor, who, has been really good about everything, trained with her in medical school. And she said, oh, you need to know about Dr. XYZ. She's really great. But like nobody knows about her. And, she'd sort of never come up in a filter as part of, and of course those of us who have found her keep her busy. But, is there a facility like CAMH, even on a smaller scale in Nova Scotia? Of course not. And, is it a chicken or egg thing? Is it just the lag of, the public system not recognizing the need that maybe does exist? Because I think there are lots of people who perhaps would like to make changes in their use, whether it's harm reduction or abstinence, but sort of fall short because there's nothing readily sort of accessible or in their sphere of understanding.
Nothing culturally competent, maybe? Is that a piece of it?
Yeah. So I don't know, because it certainly for me, when at the times in my life when I've wanted to make change, and it's been helpful to be in another jurisdiction where access to things are, number one, more known, because, to your point, they're sort of advertised and people are aware of them, and you're sort of seeing them in subway advertisements and stuff. And here we're sort of still with the mindset of, well, if you haven't used for 2 weeks, you don't have a problem.
And then there's a waiting list, right?
Yeah.
You have mental health issues, say, and how long is it going to be to see a therapist? 6 months? A year? And how often are you going to see him? And who can afford $200 an hour to go and see a therapist? Well, it's not everybody that has that luxury. And it's the therapist.
Yeah, is it the right fit?
But yeah, right. And that's difficult. It takes a while. I've had a few therapists until, finally I found someone and it was like, wow, bang on, right? For 10 years?
Attention all passengers, Captain Patrice speaking. We've reached our cruising altitude. We're now approaching the final leg of our YHZ maturity flight. Our Halifax host, Andrew, resumes his discussion with Harry and Hector as they delve into living with HIV, overlapping stigmas, the landscape of local support services, harm reduction strategies, and the delicate balance of managing use in daily life. More compelling stories await. Subscribe to stay updated. If you've encountered turbulence while listening to this podcast, please refer to our list of resources and services related to PNP chemsex in the episode description and on chemstories.ca.